I know a lot of you people really don't want to hear this, but the truth is that Rust, the language, has become an existential threat to the open source software ecosystem. Now, granted, there will always be Rust-free alternatives, or will there? It's interesting how hard Rust has been pushed, but what's really getting me is that we've moved past the point where just rewrite it in Rust is the problem and you just have these people nagging. Now you have Rust integration in core parts of pieces of infrastructure that you may not realize. The big one that really got me and that made me make this video is Rust being put into core parts of apt for Debian. See, the problem is you can't install any kind of packages in Debian if you don't have access to Debian's package management tools. And those package management tools, as of now, have added a hard dependency on Rust. Likewise, Firefox, every Firefox derivative at this point has Rust in it because it has a hard dependency on the Rust components they added a long time ago. Unless you want to use basically a fork of the Pale Moon engine, which frankly is not all that great. It's amazing. It can get old computers to work, but it's not the best. There are some problems with Goanna. So anyway, the bottom line is that Rust is getting shoved into things, and you probably are like, well, wait a minute. Isn't Rust a language that has an open source compiler? How is it a problem? It's a problem because there's only one Rust compiler, and that one Rust compiler does not support a large number of other systems. You're fine if you're sitting on your Intel or AMD laptop. You're probably fine if you're on an ARM system. These first-class architectures, they're fine. But when you move away from those and you start getting into some of the things that Linux runs on, but doesn't run, that people probably are not using as their laptop, for example, this effectively is an extinction-level event. Because Rust doesn't work, for example, on Motorola 68K. Now, yes, I know, Debian doesn't even work on that anymore. They stopped doing it. Well, the thing is, people still have this stuff out in the wild. There are other architectures, I don't even remember all of them, but Rust basically supports a set of architectures that are very popular, but the things that are not in that very popular set, they're all kind of going to fall by the wayside over time as Rust is adopted, because guess what? They're not going to bother writing any Rust ports to that. And here's why that's dangerous. Because you've got all these embedded systems out there and everybody wants to run around shrieking about security updates and how things should be kept up to date, blah, 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 blah. But the thing is, you can't do that if you can't even build the software anymore. And why is it apt in particular and Debian? Well, that's a single Linux distribution, Jody. It doesn't matter. You can still go use Fedora or whatever. You have all these other options. Well, first of all, the German government's trying to rewrite Pacman in Rust for Arch Linux. Whether that would get adopted by Arch Linux, I don't know, but Pacman's also the package manager for MinGW on Windows. So there's some carryover with that. But here's why Debian in particular is sort of the smoking gun. It's sort of the catalyst. Debian is not just a distribution. Debian is by far the most installed distribution on Earth, but not under the name Debian. Debian is the source for Ubuntu, and Ubuntu is the source for God knows how many other Linux distributions. You know how I recommended Linux Mint in the past? Because it's very easy for a not the savviest person to get set up and working, and it just sort of works out of the box for most people. That's based on Ubuntu, which is based on Debian. So yeah, do you see the problem now? There are metric tons of distributions based on Debian Linux, even if they're not nominally based on it. If they're based on Ubuntu, they're based on Debian. And remember, Ubuntu was popularized, what was it, like 20 years ago? Because it took Debian and made it more accessible, just easier for people to get into. So you now have this situation where a huge swath of the Linux ecosystem, death by 1,000 paper cuts, is chopping a lot of lesser architectures completely off the map. And the problem is that Rust, being only supported by one compiler that has incomplete support for a bunch of architectures, it effectively kills the architectures. Because now you can't compile, Firefox has been this way for a bit, you can't compile a browser to run on those, but now you can't compile the package management tools for the biggest distribution on earth for those. So the problem is, how do you install Debian without Debian's package management tools? See, so these architectures will die. And anything that does not follow the I support Rust train will die as a result. This is sort of like how we saw systemd take over the Linux ecosystem, and Red Hat was a big force in that. Now you have all these components that are under the free desktop umbrella that Red Hat just shoved systemd hard dependency into, and now most distributions run it. Granted, for some people, in some cases, the higher speed of startup that the parallel execution of startup scripts, so to speak, enables may make boot up faster for some people. However, I don't even want to talk about it. It's kind of out of the scope of this discussion. But if you don't know why systemd is a disaster, you can go look it up. There's no shortage of information about that. You don't need me to tell you. I personally would have preferred that we move to other systems that are light, but systemd is one of those conglomerations where it started off really lean in the early days, and now it's basically become an operating system in its own right. It's basically everything but the kernel, and a bunch of stuff is attaching to it. And if you don't have systemd, you get cut out of the ecosystem. So it's sort of a Windowsizing of everything. We're throwing away architecture support, and we are forcing everybody into same boxes. Yet the one place that open source distributions should be converting to a more Windows-like setup is not happening. And that's in the graphical end. Everything on open source software distributions, it doesn't matter what OS you pick, you can even pick BSDs. There's zero standardization. If you have XFCE, or if you have KDE, or if you have GNOME, they're all different. And supporting that is a nightmare. And software supporting that is also a nightmare. If you try to tell someone how to do something on Linux, well, which one of 7 completely different desktop environments do you have? Oh, you have XFCE, we might have to go edit some text files, but at least your computer's fast. Oh, you have KDE or GNOME? Well, it's buried down here in one of them, down here in another one of them. Oh, you have Fluxbox? Why are you calling me? You already know everything. I'm one of those people. Anyway, that was a little bit of a diversion, but the bottom line is that Rust is causing a cutoff of systems that are not mainstream. And you may be using or relying on these systems every day. I mean, these could be systems at banks. They could be systems pretty much anywhere. And they'll never get updated after a certain point. They'll have to be replaced. These decisions could end up costing millions of dollars in the corporate world. And yet, they're still being done. It's weird. So yeah, Rust, I know I made a lot of videos, just, blah, blah, blah about Rust, but the fact that they're shoving it into the Debian package management tools as a hard dependency, that's really where things are going to start going awry. And I know there are other distributions, but that's not the point. The point is, as more and more things adopt Rust, Rust's lack of completeness, Rust's lack of support for a bunch of architectures means that those things will be cut off. And if it gets too deep into the kernel, since at least some random people somewhere at some conference decided to say that Rust is now mainstream supported in the kernel, if it gets too far into the kernel, those architectures could end up dropped as unmaintained simply because Rust doesn't support them. So, and I know that this doesn't really necessarily affect the majority of normie users at home, except it might affect you. Because you know what happens when a corporation has to spend $10 million replacing systems that are running, I don't know exactly which ones it is, but that anything that isn't supported by Rust, any of these embedded systems or these specialty servers from the back in the day, you're going to pay for it. Prices go up based on how much the business has to spend. You will pay for this one way or another. You will pay for the Rust transition. You won't know it, but yeah, that extra 20 cents on whatever you buy at God knows where supermarket, yeah, that's your Rust tax. And it's an embedded tax, so you don't even know you're being taxed. And I know I just used the word tax for something that the government isn't doing, but as far as I'm concerned, anytime money's taken from me for something that's stupid and shouldn't be happening, that's a tax. You're taxing my ass, and you shouldn't be. So, Rust is evil. Rust is bad, but not for the reasons you think. And now that it's going mainstream through Debian, I hope you've got a fat wallet. Take care.